We are going to talk a little bit more about research and specifically using the library databases from Alkek. So, if you recall from the reading for today, the New York Times is doing a series about how journalists do their work, and looking at how journalism is the rough draft of history is one of their pieces, looking at big stories. And so I want you to think about this as you read it, about what it means to be the one writing the first draft of history, which is really what journalists have always done. The lead all, which is where they put that one big story together from a number of different reporters, that's a really challenging piece, figuring out what you're going to put in, what you're going to leave out, and being confident of the facts. So this gets back to something we've already talked about, is that credibility and your reputation, that's what you have to stand on. And it really relies on the quality of your research and your reporting. So Google is a place to start. It is a place that we often start. I admit to starting there. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it is not necessarily the most efficient way to get there. So, for example, if we're going to look at marijuana legalization, when you put that term into Google, 65 million results. Now, we know that most people don't get past the first page. That's a lot of results. So it's quick, but it's not necessarily the most efficient nor the most reliable, giving the results that come up. I mean, you've really got to look through there to find what is the most reliable and credible information. Another option through Google is Google Scholar, which is a little better depending on what you're looking for. So Google Scholar does some of what our library databases will do. If we search marijuana legalization, it's going to bring up specific academic or potentially sort of government reports, right? So that's another way to be a little more efficient using Google. Let's take a look, though, at our research databases through Alkek. Alkek invests millions of dollars, literally millions of dollars in databases, primarily through your library fees that you pay as a student. So this is money that you've paid for these research databases. So much money. So you've seen this page on the homepage of the library. You click on research databases, it gets you to this alphabetical and subject list. Another element, and we'll go back to that database list in a minute, but another thing that we have through the library is a subject guide for this class. So the library is very good about putting together area-specific subject guides that can help us. So in this class, I've asked them to compile some resources that might be useful for your project. And this is the page. It's got a number of different pages here, so you can look through all of this, including very helpful open records page. But the background research page is what I want to take a look at. For one thing, I want you to think about how you can get the full text of virtually anything out there. So if our library doesn't have access to that full text, you can put in a request for an interlibrary loan, and it will be emailed to you, often within 24 hours. So you shouldn't have to pay for, say you find an article in the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post and it says you can't look at it because it's behind a paywall. This is your paywall, right? This is your behind the paywall. It's going through the Alkek databases. Perfectly legitimate way because we have already paid for it. In fact, you have already paid for it. So let's take a look at another page on that subject library guide. A number of opinion polls are linked here. So opinion polls can give you that ever useful data that you'll need for your project. Looking at a variety of topics nationally and internationally, so you can check those out. And then also we have CQ Researcher, very helpful. We'll spend a little more time on that in a minute. But it takes an in-depth look at background on a number of current issues. So lots of places to poke around here. On CQ Researcher, this is, like I said, this sort of in-depth look at current issues, and they just do such a good job and attack so many or approach so many different issues, from college debt and immigration to terrorism and opioid addiction. So we'll look at marijuana legalization. If you click on that, you'll find that they last did their report in June of 2018, so relatively recent. You would want to update a little bit, but this is going to give you a very good sense of where we are with marijuana legalization with respect to will the federal government reduce pot restrictions. One of the nice things about these articles is that they're detailed, but they also have footnotes. So I always encourage you to just click on the footnote and see what's there, especially if you want to cite something from this, you want to get back to those original facts. And this is the footnote that leads you back to the original source. So these, that CQ Researcher is in here, but there's also CQ Magazine, Congressional Digest Pro and Con, which should give you a clue that with pro and con, we're getting the multiple sides of an issue. And then also we've got these Data Citation Index and Data Planet links. Lots of data here, again, to help you look for data in your project. Now you can just go through the basic library homepage and do a search, which is not a bad idea. You could do an advanced search. So if you type marijuana legalization and you do an advanced search through the library, you've got to click a few buttons to see what you want, but it will bring you up, bring up some specific journals and books and all sorts of things related to legalization, depending on what you asked it to find for you. So, for example, we might find this crime and legalization of recreational marijuana. And it tells you there's full text from Science Digest, and you can click on that. And if we don't have that, then you can put in a request to get a copy of that article. You can do a basic search, which is where you just type it in and hit go from the library page, and it's going to bring you up all manner of things. But you'll notice on the side you can see if it's an academic journal or a periodical, magazine, or newspaper, or if it's a book, or what you might want to look at, like an ebook. And so you can sort of decide based on that where you want to go. And also looking at the dates, of course, for how current things are. The library databases, so that was a basic library search. If we're going to the databases, you click on that database link from the homepage of the library, and you can look at it either with the alphabetical search, or you can click on the journalism and mass comm search. And if you do the journalism and mass comm search, it brings you up a number of things, but this is from the ends, right? So you could go through N, or you could go through journalism and mass comm. These databases are particularly useful to us because this is what media organizations often have subscriptions to themselves. So you may find yourself going to work somewhere where these are the resources you'd be using. So having used them already will give you an advantage. And this is true really regardless of whether you go into a newsroom per se, or whether you go into, say, a nonprofit. A lot of organizations use these databases. So let's take a look at Newsbank. So Newsbank has many, many publications from around the world. There's a lot of ways you can parse it, but let's just do a quick search. So if we just typed in marijuana legalization, it's going to bring up a number of citations, but not 65 million, right? So you don't have to sort through that. You can look at the side over here, and you'll see that you can narrow it down by the type of publication. You can see that there are 136,000 newspaper articles. That's a lot, not 65 million. There are transcripts, there are videos, journals, college newspapers even, right? So a lot of different ways that you can sort through this. So it's a much sort of quick look through without having to go through the pages of Google. So let's say you find this story, legal cannabis sales could hit 15 billion globally this year. This could be very good background for a story that you'd be doing on any number of topics within the marijuana issue. So say you wanted to look at where Texas is on this issue. Some details like this, some facts, data, statistics about the dollar value of the industry would be important. So this is CNN, and CNN says $15 billion this year. But remember, this goes back to our fact checking. You're not going to quote CNN as saying this. You're not even going to quote CNN as saying it came from this report. CNN says it came from this report, The State of Legal Cannabis Markets. And while I believe CNN is a credible news source and they do their very best to get things right, you have to go back to the original source. So I expect you to track down this State of Legal Cannabis Markets report and use that, use something from that organization. So let's take a look at that. If you Google it, which is what I would do first, probably find this article, do a quick Google hit, and I find that the State of Legal Cannabis Markets report is $597. Probably I'm not going to buy that. But again, you don't have to buy everything. So if you kept looking through Google, you would eventually find this press release from the organization that puts out this report. The press release is fine to use. So you can cite from the press release. We are going to make that assumption that the company that puts out the report, once we figure out who they are and we know that they're a legitimate company, so we would mention that, it's a market research firm, we could cite from that press release. The other thing we could do if we didn't find this, because it takes a little bit on Google to find the press release and know what you're looking at, we could go to Alkek, search for this report. I don't see the actual report on there. We might eventually get it, but I do see, again, this press release, right? So new report. So there is the press release, which would be very easy to find. I mean, there are a number of other news reports as well. Here's the press release as well. So be sure to follow all the steps, right? Follow the chain. Be the most efficient researcher that you can be. Google is a great place to start, but it's not the only place.